Om. 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 Om pranam. Om pranam. Om pranam. Om. Om pranam. Om pranam. Om pranam. Om. Om. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. 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 Om. Om. God omniscience, Om. God omnipotence, Om. God omnipresence, Om. Om. God omnipotent. Om. The eighth Satyavatara Satsangha. Om. Sssv 8. Om. Om, welcome. Om. Welcome to my God self, myself. Om. I alone exist. Om. God speaking to God about God. Om. Om, come. Om. God conjuring. Om. 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 Om, God transmitting and receiving. Om. Through God Intel Tech. Om. God Intelligence Technology. Om. Om. So one of the assignments that occurred in the previous Satsanga, Om, is the practice, the spiritual practice of non-criticism. Om. Not criticizing. And it is a very important spiritual practice of Satyavedism. Om. Because as long as there's criticism, there's not God vision. It's as simple as that. As long as there's criticizing this and that and circumstances and seeming people in the dream and casting blame and about circumstances, trying to source the blame to cast forth, to spell casting of negativity, as long as that is occurring, there is no God vision, So it is very important that these practices, that God practice, not an individual, but God is practicing, God is doing all, So to elaborate on another aspect of non-criticism, there is a very pernicious duality occurring in relativity, and it is the assigning of group blobs of masses of seeming bodies. The difference is the duality that does not really exist in truth is the rich and the poor. Now, Satyavatara has no vested interest in any of this because Satya only speaks truth. Satyavatara transmits, God transmits through the body, God truth. But to differentiate by making assertions, fictional assertions, of the various characteristics of a mass blob of aggregate bodies as the rich and the poor is dreaming. It is unreal. It is perpetuating ignorance and the continuance of divisive it's activities that cause all sorts of misunderstandings and even wars in fiction, because of the not understanding that all of the ignorance basically is casting around in the dream that is unreal, and all sorts of blame gets cast to various sources that all of it is not real. It's all just multiple group, collective, seeming in fiction misunderstandings based upon information that is fictional and perpetuated, and the seeming class wars that go on because of all of this misinformation basically perpetuates it further, and the processing keeps happening and playing out over and over again, seemingly in fiction. Now, in God Absolute, nothing is occurring. Nothing happens to anything seemingly as God Absolute. So nothing is occurring. All of that is just, it's unreal. It's all shadow play. It's dream play. It's just unreal. So a great spiritual practice of Satyavedism is to stop that sort of criticism. There is no such thing as a group of seeming individuals as a collective called the rich. And likewise, there is no big blob of apparent bodies called the poor. It doesn't exist. It's all just fictional, dreaming, conceptual nonsense. It must stop. Have to stop thinking God thought is above all that. God thought is God whole thought. It does not compartmentalize fictional segmentation. It's just unreal. It's not real. Wake. The pseudo-selfing has to. There must be a replacing of that false content that keeps going the rounds. It all hearsay, passed on through God consciousness and God consciousness. All of this misinformation that's passed along, so that that all the body mouths spout all of what have been indoctrinated to spout, depending upon the. It's just. It must end. It must end. It must stop. It must cease. For God vision is not that. It has nothing to do with that. God vision is whole. It sees the whole. All is myself as God. Yourself as you as God, I. Speaking as God, as I. Using you in God lang to mean God, I. Just so that there can be understanding if there is not familiarity with God lang and with this reality. So everything is you, God myself. That includes all the mass blob that doesn't exist, that's called the rich. That is you. Stop criticizing it. It is you. But it is not you like that, as in, quote, the rich. Likewise, the poor, all of that, everything is you. Stop criticizing yourself as God. Stop. It's all inclusive. Criticism of other, of seeming self and other, is dichotomizing reality, and nothing can dichotomize it. Reality is whole. It's all one, or not even one. It just is. It is as no parts. So the continuance of posing this against that, and making opposing, posing this there and this here. This is righteous, that is not, or I am right, this is wrong, all of that has to go. It's all false conceptual nonsense that was it was language indoctrination. The body was indoctrinated from the very beginning of its seeming appearance in relativity. The apparent primary body, the APB, was seemingly indoctrinated. It was artificially inseminated with misinformation through language. From when it first seemingly started to be taught, language is taught, is passed along. It then accumulates the various vocabulary and the various concepts and all. But if the concepts are wrong to begin with and they're perpetuated, and that is what is the indoctrination from the very, very beginning, then that is the ignorance in how it's perpetuated over and over and over again, seemingly, because it's all now in eternity. But this is what it seems to be to ignorance. Then that gets perpetuated and passed along and just disseminated and propagated, and fiction propagation through language that does not reflect reality, and concepts do not reflect reality. So it starts with language. Whatever language it is, almost all language reflects relativity, and all of the definitions of the words reflect relativity. And then all the words have different connotations depending on the different usages of, and even then there could be miscommunication through that. Even within relativity, there's miscommunication through what the meaning of the words are. It may mean something to something, God in the form of seeming another, and then that's not used that way for the one that misinterprets it, etc. All sorts of miscommunication and misinformation. Most of what is communicated, most of the knowledge that passes for real knowledge in God in the form of the world, does not reflect God reality. It does not reflect actual phenomenological reality. So language has to be investigated. It has to be investigated as if there was just beginning to understanding language all over again. Basically casting it all off, and then when words come into God consciousness, the inquiry is, well, what does this really actually mean? What does it mean? Is there veracity in the words, in what the definitions of the words are, and what the use in the sentences, God in the form of the sentences are? And what the conceptual mapping is it really reality? Does it reflect what actually is occurring? What actually is occurring, not what is thought is occurring. That is where the God, in self-realization and God realization. In God realization, it is about God actioning. What is God doing? What is God really doing? Not what is the species fiction compartmentalization of apparent bodies doing something that has already been scripted through the concepts and passed along as, well, when this is occurring, that means that let's look it up in the dictionary. Oh, it must mean this. I've been told this. So it looks like this. It looks like this, so it must be that, right? It must be what the description is that was given, right? No. Direct. What is actually happening directly? Not from what it looked like in the past. This is where cumulative knowledge of what is called the past what is called a seeming individual past that is not real. Is not real. But when it's referred to, and when the vocabulary gets bigger, the concepts get more in variety, more massive, and there's accessing to and associative inferences, etc. And what happens is that creates a memory bank of occurrences, and then tries to match the occurrence that might be happening right now, seemingly, that is only really a sliver. It's a little blip. It does not elongate into an actual extended action, but in the memory it is linear, like seemingly like that, and then it is compared to that event. Well, it looks like this event that happened, or this trauma that happened, it look like it's going to occur again. This is how the overlay on reality of when there is trauma, etc., that there is fear because of previous experience, etc. All of that is conceptual. And it's belief in the past. That is why it interferes with what is actually going on in the present, seeming present, but what is going on in eternity. So almost all of it is language-based. It's all based on indoctrination, accumulated concepts, accumulated definitions of words. So to go back to the case and the example for spiritual practice, there's a long seeming history in fiction, in the dreaming of the difference between the rich and the poor. And that is one of the major sources of conflict in God in the Form of the World. Now, that does not mean that there should not be evolution and bettering of circumstances for all, for God Omni, for all, as you, God, myself, you, as all. As the rich, as the poor, but not as those labels. Not as those labels. Those labels do not exist that way. That reality does not exist that way. It cannot continue to be thought that way. It is unreal. But as long as it's thought that way, that is dreaming, and it plays itself out in the actioning. The transmitting and receiving is to come. So the spiritual practice, again, another aspect of the spiritual practice that has been assigned, is specifically not to think in terms of what is called in the dreaming politics, because that lends itself, the rich and the poor dichotomy and dream and polarity, fiction, lends itself to what is called in the dreaming the political arena and all that. And all of that is unreal. Only the actioning is real. The phenomenological actioning of God is real, but all of the concepts and all of that is just it's not real. It's not real. The thought content must be reconfigured. There must be configured and fed truth, God truth, truth, reality truth, What is actually happening? Actuality, reality, not the false concepts. Now that usually is all that bubbles up because there's so much seeming familiarity with it that the programming plays itself seemingly over and over again, seemingly. So there has to be breaking of that, breaking down of those concepts, replacing all of that old fiction, or there is no old new, but replacing that with truth content. So spiritual practice, then again, another aspect of it is to cease and desist from thinking of things in political terms. Political terminology is fiction. It is unreal. So the fictional, the political aspecting of this, of the rich and the poor, and then all of the politics that plays itself out, or whatever, and all of that is, for God vision, it has to be eliminated. There must not be belief in it. There must not be belief in any of it. God vision is to witness all of the actioning, but not to believe in the concepts that are being propagated about that actioning. So all the God actioning is very important. There is much of it that is very important and affects many seeming apparent bodies in God manifestation. But the thoughts about all of that have to be discarded because that is unreal. And in the God vision, it becomes obvious. So all is God myself, meaning you as God, I, you. All of that is you. The seeming rich are you, only not like the rich. Satya is using that as an example to point to how important this is. The rich do not exist. The poor do not exist. Only God exists. Everything is God. Everything is God. Everything is yourself. Everything that is seen is just a mass reflection of yourself as the manifestation of God. So in absolute love, God absolute love is to love all, with all, God Omni, the whole manifestation of myself as God. So there cannot be breaking up of that and trying to oppose and push against it and say that is as if it is not yourself. That is just dreaming. It is not. It is you. It is you as God. So stop criticizing yourself. Love, God absolute love is to love all. It is to love all. And if it has to seem to start in the dream as trying to relate to that, if there is no way of relating to, quote, the rich, because there's misidentification as being part of the poor, or the other way around, if there is no understanding of, quote, the poor, because there is misidentification as the rich, that there must be getting rid of all of that, those whole conceptual ideas that are untrue. In fiction, in relativity, it starts out with at least what is called empathy or sympathy. But that is still within the dream, because that would be the sympathizing or empathizing with as an individual with another individual, or as a representative of a group with another group. But all of that is unreal. But that is how it would start if there was still not asserting the true self and continuing to cling to a shadow of an individual that does not exist. But that would be how it would happen, is to try to figure out what the commonality would be, even though it may look so extreme that they're in that polarity that there couldn't possibly be anything that's in common, except, I'm a human, that's a human, but we're fighting. No, you are not a human, and there is no fight. You as God Absolute. Nothing has ever happened to you as God Absolute. There is nothing that is occurring. And what is seen as activity is yourself as well. So there has to be stopping of criticism of yourself. And this makes it so that there's more ease, there's more seeming comfort that comes maybe to the seeming apparent body. There is by just the ceasing of the criticism of phantom groups of and individuals, there'll be peace that starts to occur just for the seeming body. And then it extends to peace for seeming others in the dreaming. But the real peace is already going on. As God myself, as God Absolute, there is peace, Shanti. It is innate. It's inherent. It just is. So that what is not peace will dissolve away. And then it becomes apparent that there's always peace. So in regard to specifics about language, there's checking. Om. Om. So specifics of language in this case. There should not be the use of adjectives, God in the form of, gitfo, adjectives in language. That have to be examined carefully, the usage. What the adjectives are actually referring to. And adverbs for action, adjectives for seeming nouns that are not really nouns because everything is verbing. Everything is goading. This all has to be said. Satya does not have to repeat every single God truth in one satsanga, seemingly, over and over again for those that have not absorbed in God consciousness the various God truth information. But some of it is repeated due to seeming contextualization. So God in the form of seeming adjectives, the usage of those adjectives in God language specifically, that they're in the assigning of nefarious malintent to a group or organization, etc. Insinuating intentionality that does not exist, that is not real. But it is felt because the fiction absorption has gotten to a pitch level where there might be seeming chemical body experiences of anger and rage, etc., or injustices and all that are seen in the dream, etc. Now, again, all of this, the evolution is to work out for the benefit of God Omni, all of the best God beneficence of situational transaction. But the adjectives that only fuel the fires of misinformation. So to go back to what is called the political context that is not political by nature, because politics is not real. The occurrences, the phenomenological occurrences as God activity are real. That is real in the sense of actually occurring, as in within God manifestation as God activity, within God consciousness, within God absolute, where nothing happens. And this, again, this cannot be conceptual, it's direct. So within the seeming activity, that there has to be the dropping of what would be considered political speak, jargon extending to political thought and all of that. It's just one more extension of all of the misinformation, conceptual propagation, but is pseudo-classified in its taxonomy as quote politics, politics occurring, which is not real. There's no politics that are occurring. It's not real. So the rich, the poor, the rich having nefarious malintent toward the poor, trying to take advantage, as if that's all that's occurring. Trying to get money, trying to make the poor stay poor, trying to have all the power. All of those are stories. And the quote, the rich saying the poor are lazy. They don't do anything. They don't deserve to have anything because they haven't worked hard enough for it. And all that nonsense. None of that is real. Those stories that are all propagated, and then others would say like, yeah, that's right. The world would fall apart if the elite didn't figure it out, because the poor can't think straight. And the poor are saying, everything would be so much better if we got rid of those elite. They're just in it for themselves. They're making everything, they're taking everything, all the resources. Yeah, all of those stories, yeah, blah, 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 blah. It's not real. The dichotomy makes it so that continuance goes on, and the situationing goes on that way, because there's not going to be any agreement when all of that misinformation is being propagated. All there's going to be is arguing and incendiary. It's just. Wake up, quote, wake up, as in God's already awake, but wake up from all of that. Replace all of that fiction with truth, with direct truth. So adjectives. Adjectives can, when used in fictional, misdirected ways, only exacerbate the misunderstood intentionality of whatever the seeming noun might be, which is not really a noun. But there has to be explaining in some way linguistically this. There has to be attention to language in God consciousness, because as the truth, the content is transacting, there has to be seeing of that, witnessing of it, and then choosing whether it seems to be incoming or outgoing. And there is no in and out. It's not real. It's all in God consciousness, happening all at once. But that as that content is configuring, then they're in the practicing, it will become more and more obvious linguistically that there is no reality attached to these words and phrases and terminology and jargon and all of that. It becomes more and more that there is God vision seeing through all of that as unreal, and no longer using those concepts in order to perpetuate more fiction thought. So adjectives are important. The adjectives are the nouns, as in large aggregate groups of lumped together as those sorts of nouns, the rich. Take that and throw it away. Stop using those labels that are not real. That is in self-realization. This either can happen before extendedly the self-realization, which seems to occur either suddenly or extendedly sort of unfolding itself out in the dissolving. But again, all of it happens in God eternity at once, because no matter how long it seems to take, it happens at once. So the language, the language can start to be deconstructed, and then there's more and more clearing, or it can happen as an explosion, and then language just like falls apart as unreal, and then there's looking at language and wondering, how can it be used? This is all nonsense. Like how can it nonsense in the sense of reality sense? That it would be, how can there be going to utilize this language that makes no sense in reality? So that could seem to happen. So whatever, it can happen seemingly before or after, and there is no linearity to it, though. This is trying to express that in ways that will there be understanding in some way. There's no leading up to anything, or something happens after something. In reality, that doesn't happen. Because in God Absolute, there's just eternity, so there's no sense of time in order to be able to speak of it in that way. But there's no language, then there's no relative language that can make sense in order to speak it about what turns out to be fiction, dreaming language. Don't want to speak in dreaming language. Want to speak in actual language of actuality, language of God reality, not dreaming language. That's like, it's as if the body were asleep and there was some language that was being used in that dream, and then the body woke up from the dream, just metaphorically woke up from the dream, and then was expected to go back into that dream and speak that language that doesn't make any sense. So the spiritual practices, which are only of God, as God doing, God manifesting, God prakatana, God is actually manifesting this. It's manifesting this. It's manifesting what's called spiritual practice. It's as God manifesting it. You're actually manifesting it. To see it as the other way around, not as a person trying to get to something, or some other state or some other event, but see it as God manifesting this, because that is what's actually happening. So God's manifesting language, proper use of language. So start to commence seemingly the practices of this by paying attention to the words that are being used. Do not go back into the dreaming and just continue to spout those words that are because the minding, it's easy because the minding is so used to having that content. And do not let seeming other apparent bodies seemingly influence these practices by pressuring of some sort, or go into this actual purity of language. So the nounding of concepts, group concepts like that, the rich. So take that phrase and get rid of it, discard it. It's not real. Likewise, take the poor and discard that. Take all of these nouns and examine. But this specific assignment in the growing non-criticism assignment practice that is being assigned. It's being transmitted. It's God transmitted. Is to cease that dichotomization, that's pitting of one group against another, because there is no group. Now we've already come to this. This has already been disseminated here, that for the non-identification with limiting assertions, that this is group. So the rich as a group do not exist. The poor as a group do not exist. These are false concepts. These are concepts that were fed, artificially inseminated in the apparent, the minding, the programming. And it goes on that way. The programming goes on that way. It's perpetuated. So take these concepts and start to discard them. Take the concepts and examine why this is untrue. Where are the rich? Where is the big blob called the rich? Where is the big blob called the poor? They have to have quantifiable phenomenological evidence for this. There has to be evidence for this, not just hearsay, not just conceptual wordplay passed along. Quantifiable evidence. Now, if there's situationing where there is need of God in the form of various items for what is called living of the apparent body, like food and shelter, God in the form of food and shelter, etc., and all that, then phenomenologically that can be referred to. And there could be more and more resources for that, for the apparent bodies to thrive more. But there is no such thing as a whole blob called the poor, etc. Okay? I had to repeat this over and over and over again until it gets dissolved. It comes into God consciousness and gets absorbed. They cannot emphasize this enough. This is one of the major dichotomies in God in the form of the world, this opposing rich against poor. It must end. It must end, because it just perpetuates misinformation. There is no rich and there is no poor. Those nouns should be taken and cast aside. Maybe that others seemingly want to continue to use those, but you as God that is being addressed must stop that. Stop speaking in fiction. Stop speaking this fictional dreaming. Okay, so get rid of those nouns. And then the adjectives. The adjectives of various intentionality. Examine adjectives for intentionality. For negative, what is called negative intentionality, positive intentionality, especially nefarious or malevolent intentionality. You have to question that. If something looks like it's malevolent or scheming or whatever, then examine whether that's actually true and where that information is coming from. Why is there thought like that? Because if it leads to fear propagation, etc., and for any words that are pushing away from, are unreal. So there should be the discarding of words that indicate malintent, etc. So that is a further enhancing of and exploring of the non-criticism assignment, and they'll continue to explore various angles on it, so that it becomes more and more clear as to what is actually being assigned. So there was already speaking of that when there is group criticism, not to seemingly in fiction, bodies congregated together and criticizing others, etc., that there shouldn't be partaking in that, and because it only encourages fiction, more fiction. If there's wanting to have feeling of commonality with God in the form of seeming others, that is yourself. There is innate commonality, meaning that everything is yourself. Don't have to go looking for commonality. It's already there, inbuilt in being God absolute. It's already there. You don't have to go seeking it. So you don't have to have criticism parties in order to feel good and accepted because others are criticizing along with you as the little you in the dream. So the act of seeming criticizing it occludes God vision. That it is God is omniscient in that vision of seeing and knowing all. But what is the God vision of clarity is that in fiction the content is in a sense occluding the larger reality vision. And that the more and more that occurs when there becomes more and more clear what is called God vision, then the what is called the solutioning it does not have to address the problem directly. There doesn't have to be figuring out, well, this is a problem and that's a problem and let's do this about this problem and etc. It's like it bypasses all of that. It goes beyond it. It goes beyond it, and the solutioning is in that vision. It's not in addressing the problems as the fictional problems and addressing to get to a fictional solution. It goes beyond that. It goes above it. It transcends it. The seeming solution is that's not a solution is the transcending of it. That's the God vision, that then the evolution is that there is more and more God beneficence and for God Omni, just by the God evolution. But there has to be language, the language evolution, in order for that to occur in the God transacting in the use of language. But thought first, it happens as thought, and then is expressed seemingly. So the assignment is, for this particular aspect of it, is to cease to try to deconstruct by ceasing to have the minding of content be of a political nature, and that there should be less and then totally discarding of masses of groups of grouping bodies into categories of in order to contrast and oppose, and thereby parting God when God cannot be parted, cannot be partitioned. And then the use of adjectives, whether it is actually describing the seeming noun or not, whether it enhances the understanding of the seeming noun and its seeming activities, but as not a part, as an apparent seeming body of the many, many bodies that are God myself, as the whole body of God, the whole manifestation. So that should be clear enough. No accusationing. No accusationing. No, that company's doing this. That the president is doing that. No. No, God is doing everything, and all is yourself. Stop acting like a person. Stop acting like a person. You're not a person. Stop thinking like a person. Stop seeing like a person. There has to be God vision, seeing as God, seeing the whole. That is yourself. God, absolute love for yourself as God. So knowing God reality directly, not what has been written about it, not what is being said right now in eternity seemingly about it. Not the regularly scheduled programming, not the irregularly scheduled programming, not programming. Spontaneous actioning. God thought. All right. So hopefully that was a comment that was supposed to be humorous, but no, it cannot be said that. And I'm not going to even repeat that, because that's just perpetuating fiction. But surely that was just a joke. So no, even that, there has to be, even not going to speak specifically about seeming specific apparent God in the form of specific apparent bodies, But every body is myself, God myself. That means that a body that is subject to what would be called in fiction public ridicule constantly, because the seeming behavior is so ridiculous or whatever, that it's scrutinized by seeming, again, the masses that do not exist. The word the masses is meaningless. But whatever, if a particular seeming body gets scrutinized because, and this has already been addressed it was addressed for criticism as in public figures, God in the form of seeming public figures. Those God in the form of seeming public figures are subjected to such criticism in fiction as to act as if those figures are somehow or other not real, or seemingly do not have any feelings because they're just famous or whatever. But that's all nonsense, because there is no such thing as a famous body. There's no such thing as all of these labels. So no, to criticize a seeming in fictional terms famous body is just is just continuing to absorb and perpetuate fiction. It should not be subject to being spoken about in such a manner. It means that the dreaming is still going on to speak about seeming public figures with criticism and negativity. It does not matter in fiction, in the dream, for those that are thinking this way still, and because it's maybe seemingly very difficult to not think, for not have the minding go this way with this content. But in the dream, to take a well-known seeming famous figure and mock that figure, that seeming person, that apparent body that is only yourself. It is yourself, but in the dream, be mocking that and having again, this lends itself to the group, to the fiction group of getting together to mock, collectively getting together to mock that one over there. It's dreaming. It just it doesn't matter. It's still dreaming. So if you want to mock a seeming public figure, it does not matter whether that apparent body is not known or very, very seemingly known. It's still yourself. It's still yourself. Stop doing that. That's what perpetuates it all. It doesn't matter if that person is famous or not. If that seeming person that's not real, that person is famous in the dream. You as the thought content, as a thought content label, are still dreaming, doing the mocking. The mocking is still occurring in the dream. This happens so much. It seemingly happens so much. That's why this is being addressed. This is being addressed this way. Stop thinking in political terms. Stop using groups of people oppositionally that do not exist in reality that way. And stop mocking seemingly famous bodies or non-famous bodies seemingly in the dream. Just stop the activity. Stop acting that way. Stop having... This is a spiritual practice. If there's wanting to get to God reality and see reality in God vision as it actually is, then no matter how much fun it is, they have to stop doing that, because that's only going to get in the way of it. that only perpetuates the fiction and not being able to have God vision that way. I mean, there is humor in much, but if it's seeming humor at the expense of God myself as yourself, then it gets in the way because it causes the division. It causes the seeming division within the dreaming. It means you, in omnitranslational terms, you will not take that seeming one that is being mocked as yourself. You refuse to see that other person seemingly in the dreaming as a reflection of you as God Absolute. If you realize that, there would not be mocking of others. There would not be criticism of others. There would be understanding as God myself. There would be inclusiveness of God as God myself. There's not God vision is total inclusion. God absolute love, unconditional God absolute love and total inclusion. It is not something that is learned. It is something that is innate, that when all the garbage is gotten rid of for the vision, for the clear vision of the whole, and then of course then all the God manifesting as God in God realization, all the manifesting, as long as all of that fiction seemingly is that dreaming vision, the dreaming vision is occluding that ability for the clarity of the God vision. Then it gets in the way of the God manifesting of all sorts of transmitting and receiving as well, meaning there is not openness to it because there's so much like fictional debris in the way that the transmitting and receiving is not clear. So then all sorts of God synchro eventings go unbeknownst because there's no way of receiving. There may be transmission, but it's like with a radio or something, God in the form of various stationing or whatever, of waves or whatever, where there's transmitting, there may be transmitting of all this God information. Like all this God information is out there to be received. And if the transmission devising, the mechanics is not clear to receive, then it's going to miss the receiving. And then likewise, again, if there's wanting of God transmission, if the mechanics, if the hardware sort of processing is all befuddled with debris and just then there won't be clear transmissioning as well. So, and then for the self-realization leading to God realization. That's what's so important about the purification and the deconstruction. It can either seemingly come before or seemingly after, and there is no before or after. That processing still is going to have to get done. It's still going to have to get done for God vision. It has to, one way or another, it just has to get done. When and where and how it happens, whether it's at once or cumulatively, or before or after, or blah, 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 whatever. It has to get done, or there's not going to be clear God vision transmitting and receiving, which is the part of the God manifesting. The God manifesting. There can be, there's self-realization, but there's endless God manifesting. God manifesting. Knowing, the doing, the knowing, so to return to that no matter what, in fiction, no matter what seeming apparent body it is, famous, unfamous, in position of power, not, no power at all, whatever, the narrative, the false narrative, whatever that narrative is about that seeming body that is not, you as God are not contained within a body. You as God are everywhere. But what it looks like, what it seems to look like, there's a form. There's speaking of God in the form of a form, whatever the form is being referred, whatever form is being referred to. That again, with this assignment, stop speaking against that form. Whatever it is, whatever the form is, that seeming God in the form of the seeming body. Stop speaking against bodies. That's it. It's that simple. It's that simple, but it gets complicated because it's so used to doing it, for having that program, those repetitive programs, the minding programs that have been learnt. They're learnt through various indoctrination, conceptually. So it may seem difficult if there's so much used to doing that. Then that's what the spiritual practicing is. It's to point out, oh, this is happening, the pointing to it and saying, all right, well, stop that. But if there's humor in the scrutinizing of the difference between fiction and reality or whatever, if there's seemingly some humor in that, or that some God eventings are actually funny. Some God eventings are quite humorous. I said God in the form of most of God in the form of what is called humanity are crazy. They're basically crazy. What seems like normal behavior is actually crazy. It's crazy. It's the other way around. Most of what is considered to seem to be normal is actually quite crazy. It's mad. Well, most humans are seemingly mad. They've been driven mad by the indoctrination. But you as God can transcend that. All of those parent bodies can transcend that, whether it be noticed or not, whether they have gotten the knowledge or not. The actual God truth transmission in this form of seeming words to seemingly start to absorb that in consciousness, in God consciousness. Most are lost in the fiction, in the collective fiction consensus dreaming. It's a mad dream. It's a nightmare. It's some of it's entertaining, seemingly. Some of it's entertaining, but the limitations that are placed by all of that indoctrination and hearsay or whatever, and it's all believed or whatever, that keeps the evolution from occurring much more swiftly and exponentially. So, and this is why the God truth transmissioning has to keep occurring in order to at least introduce all of this information in order to be absorbed, is just to start to have the actioning. So there, some of the God eventing is quite humorous. So there can be humor in it, obviously, but there is not that humor that seems to be at the expense of a particular body or whatever, and is divisive, basically, and pushes against as separative. It's not even laughing with, it's laughing at or whatever. It's that pushing away of the self in seeming others. That's not myself, and mocking that. That is not God vision. It's simply being stated. It's dreaming. So if you want to continue to dream and there's fun in doing so at the expense of God in the form of seeming others or God omni or various aspects of reality that seem to be the not that somehow or other there's discomfort with that, then that's only continuing to it's only perpetuating the fiction at the expense of seeming others and at one's false self. The apparent seeming other as false self and the I as false self. And no, there is no such thing as I as God am mocking a false self in someone else. No, that doesn't exist. Can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. It's not this is true and that person over there is false. No, that person doesn't exist as a person. That is God. You can't say I am God and then others are not God. So whatever person seemingly is being mocked, is just mocking God in a dream, as a dream character, in the dream. You can't associate the other as the dream character and then say that you are real. It doesn't work that way. That's not God vision. And you can't even say, well, that other is God, but I'm going to continue to mock that other as the person, knowing that the other is God, and continuing to mock that other as the person anyway. You can't have that. It doesn't work that way. God vision doesn't work that way. It doesn't. It just doesn't. There's a dropping of that. When you see that it's all God myself, then you cease the mocking of it that way. You find there's other humor. There's other humor that's not at the expense of continuing to perpetrate fiction. You cannot see oneself as real and others as not real. It doesn't. It's really it's simple like that, but it's just that everything's so convoluted in the dream and you want to wake up from madness, wake up from the human collective God in the form of madness into reality, into waking up to oneself that is already awake always as God. So in any case, criticism can be what's called addictive. It's just one more addictive behavioring seemingly in the dream. But it's a really large addiction. And it is just, it's encouraged. It's encouraged, this behavior. And it does not have anything to do with, oh, that's bad or that's good, and you must be good. It doesn't have anything to do with that. God reality has nothing to do with morality. It may translate in some way, is seen in relativity as that there are moral acts that are done by bodies, but no, God reality has nothing to do with morality. And there are acts within God that look like that couldn't possibly have anything to do with morality. Because that what's actual is not indoctrination, not trying to indoctrinate bodies to be good to other bodies. Not trying to that's the socialization indoctrination. That's not God reality. That God reality has nothing to do with indoctrination. So there are various seeming religions where the mystical aspects have been convoluted by the relative fictioning of the religion in order to get bodies to be good, because being bad is going to cause problems and all of that. Satyavedism doesn't have anything to do with that. It's not about indoctrinating bodies in order to be good. So criticism, then, as an extension, the practice of the spiritual practice of criticism, non-criticism, doesn't have anything to do with trying to get bodies to be kinder and good to other bodies. That it's just that in the realization, it's an extension. It's sort of a fallout from it that seems to occur. It seems to occur. That then there is no speaking against bodies, because what's the point? It's like everything is myself and everything is love. So why would there be speaking against other bodies? It becomes a foreign concept to have God thought to have that occur. And there's so much humor in what is called humor as an activity. So much humor in the fiction, in relativity or other, is based on mocking. If there's going into humor, to species-centric humor, much of it has to do with mocking, criticism and mocking. And then others think it's funny because they're so used to that form of humor that's normal. There are all sorts of forms of humor. There's dark humor and humor where others would get jokes and others wouldn't, and all of that. And this has nothing to do with policing the type of humor that is appropriate or inappropriate or anything. This is about God realization. It's about self-realization. So for self-realization and God realization, there's a lot of discarding of what is considered conventionally or unconventionally humorous. It takes on God manifestation takes on a whole other sort of humor. There's a whole sort of other humor going on here. But it's not what would be considered consensive. It's just not. Even the God vision humor transforms into something else. Yeah, what happens is when the when the criticism gets dropped, when the sort of consensive criticism that goes on, the group criticism of groups that don't exist, the individual criticism of others that don't exist as individuals, etc. The belief in those as individual, like the apparent bodies are real, but they're not really separate forms, actually, because God omniverse is endless, and a multiverse, basically a form within form within form within form within form. So the pointing to one form is again an illusion too, but there has to be speaking, there has to be use of language somehow. So that's why, and visually it may seem to appear that way. But once there is the ceasing of gradually whatever in eternity, what seems to be gradual, because it usually would not happen all at once, because it seemingly will take some effort to restrain, or retrain, or to take away the content or whatever, to dissuade that from occurring or whatever. That the more and more that occurs, the more relief the body will have, just by not having to have that, to be conduit to that sort of energy and that sort of thought. And then that frees up the energies and then more thought content, truth content to transpire, and the energies start to flow more, because that is the Shakti, the God energy. Then that lends itself to the God manifesting again as being expressed, which is the more and more all of that gets broken up and gets seemingly out of the way, the more clearness there's going to be for all sorts of other the actual the actual and the manifesting and the transmitting and receiving, like what is considered what is considered the various siddhis and shaktis that occur when there's more and more clarity of God vision. All of that is going to seemingly start to, it will appear as if it starts to get more frequent, and there starts to be more integration into the whole of the energies and the God information. Most importantly, it's like the God information, the transmitting and receiving, and the energies, the God energies, all of that start. The more there's freeing up of the seeming resources, then it becomes the infinite, all of that infinite God information and God energy or whatever. So all of that. So, but we just have to get rid of all the garbage in the way that's not really in the way, but it's why it's so I have to express it this way. But it frees up resources. And then after a while, it may seem like, why was there even bothering to be speaking that way at all? Then when it becomes more and more clear that dreaming is just ridiculous as dreaming. It's just, and then why would there be going back to seemingly, but it may appear that way, back to all of that way of seeing it. So it will be a seeming relief to the body and to seemingly other bodies as well. And if this can happen as practice, when the teachings become more and more widely propagated, and this particular aspect of the spiritual practices that is very much being represented, is that when there is less and less seemingly use of linguistics to perpetuate what is called and manifesting of the ignorance of criticism and blame, and perpetuating blaming and linguistic divisions and divisiveness, insinuating intentions that are unreal to bodies that may very well not have ever intended that, but it's just imagined, etc. When a lot of that is cleared, then the God manifesting of all of it, all the God circumstancings of all of that will seem to have morphed into something else, seemingly. It is a very, very important teaching, because it has much import in the actual God manifesting as a seeming whole, as it goes out and gets absorbed and becomes actual practicing, God manifesting, God prakatana, God manifesting the non-criticism, which is another aspect of the wider non-judgment. The non-judgment of Satyavedism is one of the tenets of Satyavedism, and the non-criticism is a form of the non-judgment, because it will have wide repercussions in God in the form of the world if this is to cease. More importantly, that self-realization and God realization will blow that away and affect God in the form of the world greatly in the God evolution. So, but the practicing of this, this particular God in the form of this particular practice is very, very important, and it may seem difficult, and there might have to be continuing to manifest it and seemingly remind over and over and over and over and over and over again until it works its way out. So do not feel defeated if at first seemingly the practice is difficult, or if there's attachment to seemingly individual collective criticism and camaraderie and all that in fiction. Just keep absorbing and in God consciousness, keep the reminding going, most importantly, keep the witnessing and the observing, so that there's catching that seeming activity of the thought content, because that's what it is. It's the thought content that then influences the God manifesting of the actual activity that seeming apparent body then perpetuates, or so either by word or what was considered by action. Of course, all of it is God actioning, but what is considered thought, God speech, God action. So, would like there to be some God in the form of God in the happening of transmitting and receiving. So there can be the calling via the God in the form of Facebook Messenger. There are some questionings that are occurring in what are called the commentings, and there would be answering each one of the questionings, but would like to have this be open to God in the form, God Omni, for God in the form of those that would like to either have questioning through commenting and through the audio of God in the form of God FBM, Facebook messengering, to speak in this Satsangha, to ask questions, inquiries about God, about self-realization and God realization, and about spiritual practices and about God reality, and etc. and all, and try to refrain from speaking about oneself as God as the body, because what is to occur is that when they're speaking as if the body, that they'll be pointing out the various ways in which the speech is unreal and false, because in order to get to self-realization as the true self, the real self, that there has to be discontinuing the use of language as the false self, which is the individual body. So you're confusing and and misidentifying oneself with the body, which is what you have been taught to do. You, God, have been hypnotized into believing that you are limited to a small, little, tiny, seeming in this particular aspect of seeming human, teeny weeny little dot body, which is untrue. That is not what you truly are. So those that are God in the form of God, transmitting and receiving, God is going to be calling and speaking in, and so when they're speaking as if one is a person, then Satyavatara is going to point out God in the form of God speaking through, God speaking as in God truth through this conduit, and being received as through digitally through God Intel Tech, is going to point out when there is speaking as the with the misidentification, and also misidentifying other seeming forms and objects, and misidentifying seeming other groups, and believing in time and in history and in the past and the future, and all of those major concepts that are untrue, and continuing to call out in the dreaming, going to call you out, as basically that you are in fact God, and when you're speaking as a person, then you are going to get called out for that behavior. So be prepared, because this is not what would be considered normal satsanga, if that has not already been apparent. This is not normal, what would be considered satsanga. Basically, that they're not going to be coddled and treated as a human, and as like a little tiny, basically child, a spiritual child form or whatever, that is trying to grow up into a spiritual entity or being or whatever. All of that, all of those narratives are false. And so when there is speaking, they're speaking directly as God, and they're speaking to God as God direct. And when God is misinformed, seemingly, and dreaming or whatever, then it was going to make that call to attention, that, and call and point directly to what one truly is. And it may appear to be for God as experiencing that to be, well, there may be many reactions to that. There could be that it's funny and it's not taken seriously, because it just doesn't seem right or whatever, and so it could be that would be taken as humor. It could be taken as an insult. It could be taken as something that could cause anger. It could be taken as, that they don't want to deal with it because it's too difficult. It could be taken in so many ways. So, but what would happen is that mistaking of it would basically be, again, it would be because of the misidentification as an individual. Because it seems that this God information seems so strange to the coming to what would be an individual and speaking at that way. So likewise, when there is the asking of questions or an inquiry or whatever, it should be taken for, this has to be said directly, that there is speaking to God. There is not speaking to a person that is called Satya or whatever. There may be looking at an appearance and seeing that, and then reacting in some way, but the God transmission, the God thought and God words and the scriptures that emanate forth through this form, and through the God intellect, more importantly, the God intellect that is transmitting through for this transmission, is in fact going into God consciousness. It's being absorbed into God consciousness one way or another, whether there is belief in being an individual or not, whether there's belief in that there's a world, and that the world seems predictable, and that and whatever the seeming ways of expressing what the world is like, and the various seeming emotions that seem to be individual, etc., about it, etc., and all that, and whatever it seems to be occurring. This is in fact all God movement. It's God manifesting. It is God speaking to God about God. It's God transmitting and receiving. All of this is God's doing. God's doing everything. So this is all being transmitted and being expressed directly as God truth. So the answers, God in the form of God in the happening of the answers, are going to be God absolute, God truth. And no matter how it seems, no matter how it may sound, no matter how it may appear, and that is all. So, all right. So various ways of, quote, seeming to wake you up out of the dream and into yourself that you are already, are to be employed through God love, through shocking, through various seeming spontaneous methodology. Now, again, this is being left wide open. There are not any seeming restrictions that are being enforced as to what calls are appropriate or inappropriate, etc., because all is myself. So that means that even the ones God in the form of the calls that may seem to maybe not be appropriate, might be in different ways. So some of what has already been sort of transacted, some of it is seemingly sort of lightweight, sort of welcome introductory, just to, as in getting to know body to body. So, and that is all sort of well and good, but everything is myself. So I already know you. You don't have to acclimate to, Satya doesn't have to acclimate to you. I already know you so intimately that there's like intimately, like has been said before, I know you, so you don't have to ask where are you from, or and very seeming personal information about the body when there's nothing personal. There's nothing personal in God, as in person, or adjective of person, all, or whatever, or there's nothing hidden in that way, and not referred to in that way, because that's mistaking the body. And even that, in God manifestation, there is no separation of one body and then another body, because it's all made in the substratum of the same substances. And it's interpenetrated, and it's all pervading and interpenetrating already. It's all within everything. I am within everything. And everything is within myself, God myself. It's both. So I know you. So when there is transmitting and receiving, then unless you think you are a person, there should be this familiarity in that. That's what the realization is, whatever, is that there's that familiarity where there's no boundaries of you and you and you and you and I, or whatever. You don't have to introduce anything. You don't have to get to know you. I already know you. As I, God I. But if there has to be some pleasantries or whatever, see, God own pranam to God, not as God within you and God within me, but as in God, the whole. That is myself. I have no boundaries. I'm not stuck in a body. You are not stuck in a body. The bodies are not meeting as in separate and separate, separate and separate, or same within separate, same within separate. It's not like that. It's that I am limitless. I have no boundaries. I'm unbounded. I have no dimensionality. Oh, dimensions are within myself as God manifestation, but I have no dimensionality. I cannot be found. I'm not found. I wasn't lost and I'm not found. I am. And I am. I always am. Not as God consciousness, but as God absolute. The I am that's usually referred to is the God consciousness. The I am, that feeling of individuality, of being conscious. That's not what Satya is saying. Satya is saying God consciousness. God consciousness is a whole consciousness everywhere. So that is what you are as God. Satya's not saying that Satya's this and others are not. It's already been said over and over and over again. It doesn't even have to be clarified at this point. But so be it for those that have not heard. But God in the form of, there are no others. So if God should do some transmitting, so there could be transmitting and receiving. So the nature of this is that has already been expressed, that there should be questioning about what would be called inquiry into oneself as God, if it's not already known, and for the most part it will not be known. So it's there's a lot of occlusion in the way, seemingly, and so much of that has to be cleared. Some of it is conceptual, so the concepts have to be replaced, but ultimately the direct is not about concepts. Direct experience and direct knowledge is not about concepts. There could be absolutely no language whatsoever. There could be absolutely no language whatsoever, and that would be sufficient. But the mission is that this has to spread, and just as the God silence. God does not need language. There are all sorts of objects that speak in other ways that have nothing to do with the language that would be considered through words, or animate objects, seemingly animate objects, that all is alive. So the questioning, again, is wide open. But there are various forms of what would be considered seemingly more appropriate or not. So now don't be prepared, because preparing is unreal. But don't seemingly be surprised either when it may seem certain aspects of this transmissioning would seem to be aggressive in getting you to get to the true self, and to see through the fiction. And invariably, some of it is going to be met as more, and it just gets more and more disseminated, and this body seemingly becomes more and more known. There may be met with hostility about it because it's so challenging to what's considered the normal programming, and will relentlessly continue to get God to see through as God and not as the fictional persons, the fictional bodies. So this will continue to challenge in various ways. And that may not feel good for some. So then there'll have to be the choice made whether there's to go elsewhere and get the fiction instead, or whether there's to persevere and get the truth, to get the God truth. So there's various methodologies, and it may or may not feel great. Some methodologies may be fun, and other methodologies may be challenging and very uncomfortable. So the whole gamut, the whole range. So again, this shouldn't be intimidating, though. It's not meant to be. It's not meant to be, because in all of this there is still God, absolute love. So all of that is there. It has to be there. It just is. So whatever projectioning there is from the interactioning would definitely just point to the fact that there's fictional misidentification going on. If there's uncomfortableness, that means there's fictional misidentification going on. But otherwise, there wouldn't be any uncomfortableness. There'd just be peace and seeming love. There wouldn't be any conflict whatsoever. So whatever conflict there might be from various transactions of receiving God, transmitting and receiving, would be dreamt, because there's no feeling of it. There, in God actuality, nothing is occurring. There's no feeling of that. So, but there's knowing that this is going to happen in various ways through God vision. So what's being expressed is, welcome, come, God is myself, come, get the God information. God information is transmitted through there are various ways, and through what is called transmitting and receiving, and through the Satsanghas, the various ways that God information is given. So I would like that this be open to as many seeming transactions as possible, through that it not be dominated by any seeming one transaction in particular, because that's not real. It's not real, but there were some calls that were coming in before the broadcasting. There is some, there should be some seriousness about calling. It's already been said that some information would be better presented to God in the form of myself in other seeming bodies where the information could be addressed appropriately, if you still want to perpetuate the fictional dream. In other words, if you just want to stay within the dream and you want information about the dream and continuing to dream, then if there is seeing this already. You're already being awakened up. You're being beckoned for awakening up just by the fact that there's been coming across this God transmissional information. Just by that very fact that there might be seeing this or hearing it in God consciousness, absorbing it, not even knowing what it is almost. Just by that fact that there are no coincidences in God manifestation, in God manifesting. So that is already God manifesting that there to be proximity seemingly in non-locality to this information. That is already a sign, as it's already been expressed. If there are any God in the form of that are interfacing with any of this God information in God consciousness, that is already a seeming wake-up call without even knowing what it is. So that should be taken, it's being said directly, it's being given as God information directly, that there are no coincidences. This is God synchro-eventing. So that means that is meant to be. Any access to this God information is meant to be, through any form, through any propagating whatsoever, even through the mere seeing of a digital representation of the body radiance and the body energetically through Shaktipat transmissioning alone. There are those that seemingly wake up just from seeing an image and that are called to find more God information because of it. So there is no belittling of any seeming transactioning in God, of God truth information. So if there's broaching this God transmission and receiving, God transmitting and receiving, even if the seeming intentionality may not be serious, then there is still, God is still waking you up in just by the presence. So you're being alerted directly, if there's hearing this, that even if there is not knowing why, there may be looking at the body and saying that the body is pleasing to look at, or projecting upon the body and being attracted to the body for other apparent reasons, that is only because you are being attracted to God. You're being pulled toward God information, unbeknownst to you seemingly, if those are the seeming intentions that are not true in reality. There's something else going on, in other words, that may or may not be seen through God vision. And that's why there is attractedness to this body. So if there is inappropriate behavioring to the body because of the felt attraction that is being misunderstood, then that is because God is transmitting God information through the body. And it does not matter what the seeming intentioning is. That is actually what is occurring. God is manifesting for that God information to enter God consciousness, no matter what the intentioning may be. So absorb that, because that is what's actually happening. That's what's actually happening. So God in the form of those that have seemingly called before, seemingly, that may be readdressed, but for now, in eternity, would like to open to those the seemingly who have not called before, so that there can be as much openness to all, God Omni. Now, let's see, in eternity. Om. God in the form of, there have been so many messagings occurring where there's been requests for calling. So many. And so firstly, that there should be understanding that there's not avoiding those calls, and that there should not be hurt feelings because there seemingly is not attention to individual attention. In fact, those messages are being read or are to be read or to be absorbed, and all of the messaging does in fact there is attentiveness to all of the messaging. But this is when the Satsanghas are specifically for this. So if there's requests for videoing, for exchanging of and inquiry or whatever, then it should be in this transmitting and receiving now, and in the many to come in eternity. The Satsanghas. And this will happen with more and more frequency. So there does not have to be disclosing of what is called name label of the apparent primary body. There can be calling and for the sound, for the transmission to come through and to be recorded. And there does not have to be disclosing of name if that would be uncomfortable. And for those that are shy, seemingly, there can be asking through comments or sending inquiry through Facebook Messenger, through texting, or through God in the form of the website, in order to get responses through this means, so that the information can go to God Omni for the benefit of all. All questions that are then God information transmitted are for the benefit of all. As yourself, as God. All right. All right, well, evidently this God transmitting has been streaming for a while in God Eternity. And there could be calling for God speaking to God about God through the audio transmission. There could be going into that. So there's going to be Oh, okay. There is not accepting this one because there was calling before in a previous gift of Satsangha Om, and the intentionality is questionable. So the combination of the two would make it so that there has to be a little bit of waiting before that can be received again. Do not take that personally, because there is no person. But there should be reserving for another seeming God in the happening of Satsanga for that to occur. And God thanks. All right, then. We'll wait for another God sign. God is signing whether there should be continuance of Satsanga number 9 shortly, or whether there should be continuance of this Satsanga. Om. Which is God vision. So what has transpired in God manifesting is that there was live broadcasting of God in the form of, God in the happening of, the live stream Sasssv 29, which addressed the Panchavandanam, Bodhana and Sayana, and then also the Shuddhi. And there are God in the form of the Panchavandanam guides that are now propagating as well. There are 2 of the Bodhana and Sayana, and then separately, seemingly, of the Shuddhi. And so those are propagating and need to be God absorbed. They need to be absorbed in God consciousness, so that there can be the starting of the seeming commencing of those observances that are most simple of the Panchavandanam to begin to get acclimated. And so there the assignment, another assignment, and Gifo, the avatar is keeping track of the God in the form of the assignments as these are occurring in the Satsanghas, so that they can refer to those assignments to see if there is progress, seemingly progress or whatever, of God manifesting those activities and expanding the referencings of those activities. So the assignment is of the spiritual practice of to get acclimated to the information that has just been released, and there's a lot of information, so there has to absorb it if necessary. It can be segmented at convenience, but it should be absorbed in total, in order to start to God manifest those activities of God. So, and then there can be inquiry about was there already speaking before?
Jai Shri Mahakal. Jai Magick.
I think there was speaking before, right?
Show me your face.
Oh yes, there was speaking before. All right. Since there's previously seemingly speaking before in the Satsanga, and so there needs to be what would be called conventionally taking turns. So that means that there should be seeming others that are myself that call in, and then maybe there can be calling back for another Satsanga. So, but God pranam, and thanks for the transmission. There should be seriousness about inquiry. And that's fine. It's fine. There'll be much inquiry. I mean, there already is much inquiry, but in this way, in this form of inquiring, there'll be much inquiry this way. In this just lends itself to being able to have the God transmissions come forth through the seeming body, one way or another, whether it be through transmitting and receiving initially, or more so toward transmitting. However it happens, however God manifests is fine. There's no projections about it. None. So anyway, that is the seeming assignment, the spiritual practice, and a very important spiritual practice. One of the core spiritual practices of and non-dual God manifesting of Satyavedism is the God in the form of and God in the happening of the Panchavandanam of Satyavedism. So begin to absorb in consciousness if that is are not already taking place. If it is already taking place, then that is great, God auspiciousness. And if not, then to continue to go through the teachings that have just been released, and this teaching as well. Obviously, there's just multitudinous God information that's never ending in the various forms. And so there's plenty of it. So the next Satyavatara Satsangha should be shortly in eternity. And so absorb this that is taking place in the interim in God eternity. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Infinite Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om 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 Om. God alone exists. God alone is reality. I am God. I am God. I am God. Om Om Om. Om pranam. Om pranam. Om pranam. Om. Om. Om.